Dangerous Journey by Alwyn Cox.
There was forest all round for hundreds of kilometers. And there were no roads in the forest. There were only tracks. 2 tents stood in a clearing. 2 men were standing near the tents. The younger man, Manuel, was making coffee on a small stove. He looked up at the sky. "It's going to rain today," he said. "I know," replied Leon. "And the rain will turn the ground into mud. Then we'll never get back to base." 4 men were working in the forest. They were looking for iron and other metals. Leon was the boss, and he was angry. It was early morning. Leon and Manuel were ready to leave, but Joe and Pedro were out in the forest. "They left in the truck 2 days ago," said Leon. "They're very late." Joe was always making trouble. He was younger than Leon, and he was clever. He wanted to be boss. Manuel poured the coffee into mugs, and the 2 men drank it slowly. Suddenly, they heard the sound of a truck. "They're back," said Manuel. The truck came up the rough track. It stopped near the tents. Joe jumped out. He was a big man with red hair. He was smiling. His smile made Leon more angry. "You're late," said Leon. "Where have you been?" "Hunting," replied Joe, and he held up his rifle. "Hunting?" Leon shouted angrily. "That's not your job. We haven't time for hunting." "We were away for 2 days," replied Joe. "We're not very late." "I'm the boss here," Leon shouted. Joe looked at Leon angrily. He was not smiling now. "We're late, very late," said Leon. "The rain will start soon, and then there will be mud everywhere. We must leave now." Manuel took down the tents, and Joe and Pedro put the boxes into the truck. "Hurry!" shouted Leon. "It's 10 o'clock. Let's go." Soon, everything was in the truck. Joe sat in the driver's seat. Leon sat beside him. Manuel and Pedro climbed into the back of the truck. Joe started the engine, and the journey began. They drove easily for the first 20 kilometers. Then they came to a stream. "There was no water here last week," Pedro shouted to Manuel. "Look at the water now!" The stream was full of water. Joe slowed down and drove the truck carefully through the rushing water. They crossed the stream, and Joe drove faster. The rain was now falling heavily. The track was very muddy, and the truck began to slide. "Watch out!" shouted Leon. But it was too late. The truck stopped. The wheels were still turning, but the truck was not moving. The wheels were turning round and round in the mud. Leon got out, and Pedro and Manuel jumped down. Joe sat in the driver's seat. Leon looked at the wheels in the mud. Then he looked up at Joe. "It's your fault," he said angrily. "You were driving too fast." "Pedro, you cut branches from those trees," ordered Leon. "And you, Manuel, throw the branches under the wheels." Pedro got a large knife out of the truck, and Manuel helped him. Leon turned to Joe. "You, come and help us." Joe did not move. "I'm driving the truck," he said. "That's my job." "I'm boss here," shouted Leon. "Come and help us." Joe did not say anything. He did not get out of the truck. Leon looked at him angrily. Then Leon walked away. Manuel and Pedro threw branches under the wheels. "Okay, that's enough," said Leon. "Let's go." Joe started the engine again. Pedro and Manuel pushed the back of the truck. The wheels turned and the engine roared. But the truck did not move. "Push harder!" shouted Leon. Suddenly, the truck moved forward. It was out of the mud. Pedro and Manuel shouted happily. At that moment, a large branch flew up from under a wheel. It hit Leon's arm. He stepped back and fell in the mud. "Stop the truck!" shouted Manuel. "Leon's hurt!" "My arm. Let me see. It hurts. It's broken. I'll tie it up." "That's better, thanks. You're lucky it's your left arm." "Yes, I can use my right." At midday, it was still raining heavily. The track was covered with mud. Joe drove slowly, and the truck did not stop again. They climbed up a steep hill. On the other side, the track went down to a river. It was the biggest river in the forest. This was the last river between the men and their base. An old wooden bridge crossed over the river. They drove down towards the bridge. "Look!" Leon shouted to Joe. "Something's wrong! It's the bridge! It's broken!" Joe did not stop the truck. He drove down slowly to the bank of the river. He drove to the edge of the broken bridge. Then he stopped. They all got out of the truck. They stood in silence. Nobody spoke. They looked at the broken bridge and at the rushing water. Pedro spoke first. "There is no way across the river now. How can we get back to base?" "We must get help," said Leon. "Pedro, you climb back up the hill. Take the radio with you and call base. Perhaps they'll hear you and send help." Manuel lifted the radio out of the truck and fixed it to Pedro's back. Joe stopped them. "It won't work," he said. "Why not?" asked Leon. "It isn't a strong radio," replied Joe. "We're too far away from the base. No one will hear us from this side of the river. We must cross the river by ourselves." "We can't," said Leon. "We must get help." "We can't get help from here," said Joe. "We must cross the river first. Then we can get help." "But how do we get across?" asked Leon. "It's too dangerous. Look at the water." The rain was still falling heavily, and the water was rising. "I have a plan," said Joe. Leon looked at Joe and smiled. "You're clever, Joe," Leon said. "You always have plans, but they never work." "Let's listen to Joe's plan," said Manuel. "We can use the boat," said Joe. Leon laughed. "Don't be stupid. The boat's too small for 4 people. And look at the rushing water. It will carry the boat away." "But we've got a rope," said Joe. "We can tie the rope to the boat. With luck, the water will carry the boat to the other side." "We can try it," said Pedro. "It won't work," said Leon. "It will work," said Joe. "Look, I'll show you."